Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the Strategic Planning Community of Practice Session 3, Mobilizing Community to Change. My name is Chelsea Fish, and I'm the Program Support and Logistics Coordinator supporting the OJJDP, Tribal Youth Training, and Technical Assistance Center. I'll be your facilitator today, and we're happy to have you all with us. Before we get started with the presentation, I'd like to go over housekeeping for today's session. First, today we'll be using the chat box below for you to ask questions, chat with your peers, and to let us know if you're experiencing technical issues. Please note that all participant microphones will remain muted for the entire duration of the session. So please, chat us at any time if you're experiencing any difficulties. Always remember that if you lose internet connection or your screen isn't working properly, first, troubleshoot this issue by hitting the refresh button in your browser. Moving on, let's start using the chat box now. Let's all introduce ourselves. Please take this time to enter your name and the tribal youth community you are serving into the chat box now. Secondly, it's important that participants know how to ask questions and what to expect when waiting for a response. At any given time, participants can write questions into the chat box, and we encourage you to pose your questions as you think of them. So as questions come up in your head, please chat us. We'll take a quick pause to read your question aloud, and our presenter or presenters will provide a response. Referring to the picture of the chat box on the screen now, notice some of the chat-like activity examples. Also note that there's a block of time reserved at the end of today's presentation for additional questions or to provide answers to questions that we weren't able to address during the presentation for some reason. Lastly, we also have Courtney Yaholer with us today on the line, and he'll be your facilitator during a special period at the end of today's session. We have arranged for a guest speaker, Ms. Melinda Sprague from the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. Melinda will share her experiences using the Community Readiness Assessment, and we're excited to have her join us. With that said, let's go ahead and get started. Today we have Dr. Pamela Jumper-Thurman and Dr. Barbara Plusted from the National Center for Community Readiness at Colorado State University with us. Some of you may remember them from the last session on the Community Readiness Model, conducting and scoring interviews. We are happy to have them back with us today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Barbara Plusted at this time. Dr. Plusted?
Thank you, Chelsea. Well, on behalf of Pam and myself, we are excited to present this webinar today because really this is where the community readiness model really becomes alive within a community. So we hope you have questions and that we can answer them today and hope you benefit from this webinar. As Chelsea said, we are from the National Center for Community Readiness out of Colorado State University. And really today what I'm going to cover is just a really brief overview of the model again, just in case there's people on the line that weren't available for last week or last month's webinar. And then also to give all of you kind of a really good grounding in how do we use the scores of the interviews, of the dimensions, when we go into our community to actually develop an action plan. How does that work, and how do we use the scores, and also the themes that are presented during those interviews. And so that's what we plan to present today. And then at the end, which we're very excited to have someone that's going to be speaking about how they use the scores and the model within their community. And so just a brief overview. So the process is, and it doesn't matter what issue you're using, but to identify that issue and to be as specific as possible when you identify what the issue is, and then defining your community. And so whether that's a geographic region, a tribe, the youth community, elder community, it's really up to you on what that community is and your definition of it. And then to conduct those key respondent interviews, and those can be done either on the phone or face-to-face. Those interviews usually last somewhere between 30 minutes to an hour, sometimes an hour and a half, depending. And then you score those interviews, and that's kind of what we covered a little bit on the last webinar, is that process of using 2 people to score each interview so that you come up with dimension scores that you can take to your community to then conduct a workshop to develop strategies that are based on your level of readiness, and then for the community or tribe to really implement that strategic plan across the community. These are the 6 dimensions that we look at with the community readiness model. We look at the community efforts and what's currently going on as far as program, activities, policies related to the issue that you've selected. How knowledgeable is the community members of those efforts? Questions about leadership, how involved, supportive are the leadership and knowledgeable about the issue that you're addressing? The community climate really kind of addresses what kind of community do we live in and what are the strengths, maybe some of the barriers to the community, and how do you, and the engagement of the community in issues. And then dimension E is the community's knowledge of the issue. So do they know, and depending on the issue, but do they know warning signs if it's juvenile delinquency? Do they know signs, symptoms if it happens to be a mental health issue or a health issue? Do they know local data? So how knowledgeable are they about the issue? And then what resources does the community or tribe have? Not so much as far as funding as grants, but also people volunteering time and space being available. The land, a lake can be a resource. All kind of thinking outside the box, what resources do we have that we could use to address the issue that we've identified? So those are our 6 dimensions. And then each of those dimensions get a stage of readiness score. And these are the stages of readiness in our model, from no awareness to denial, vague awareness, pre-planning, preparation, initiation, stabilization, confirmation expansion, and high level of community ownership. And so you can just see, even just by the terms used, that there's this increase of involvement, knowledge, and activity going on within the community or tribe once one of these stages is given to a dimension. Back one. And now I'm going to turn it, that's just kind of the overview, and I'm going to turn it over now to Pam to talk about actually doing the workshop.
To me, this is one of the most exciting components of community readiness because we get to see the assessment turn into action. And inviting people to the workshop is really important, especially invite all those who were interviewed, but try to get other community members to attend as well. It's always helpful if you can get youth to attend and elders, anyone who would support the initiative. All of the key contacts in the community should invite members of the community that they believe might support this effort. At the workshop, we always start on time, of course, and we have a workshop folder for each participant, and we go through that folder step by step with what they have. They have the PowerPoint presentation. We do not give them the scores at this point. They have a blank action plan template. They have the stage definitions. They have the strategy sheets by stage. And we do just a very brief 30 to 45-minute overview of the community readiness model. And really, it doesn't even have to be that long. If you're having a short meeting, you can do a 15-minute overview. In the Community Readiness Manual, you'll find a section that has a presentation script that you can use just step by step. It has every single word, every slide, every piece that would be helpful for you. The stages that we give them at this point, oh, wait a minute. Barb wants me to go back one here.
That one.
Okay.
Missed it.
Oh, it flipped forward. Sorry about that. We also bring copies of the community readiness scores for each participant, but we do not put the scores, as I said, in the workshop folder. We hand them out after we present the scores. We have extra copies of the action plan template, and we have a flash drive with the PowerPoint so that we can give that to the key contact so that every group member there can go out to their own agencies and present the model and scores to their community. So the stage planning that we use, this is just a little bit about the stages and what kinds of things work at each stage. At No Awareness, we're talking about very, very basic kinds of things. This is that one-on-one visits with community leaders, visiting existing and established small groups to share the local information. You can share general information about the issue. You can start your search for online resources, posters, educational information, anything that can be duplicated or ordered at that point. You can make phone calls to friends. You can inform them and get them excited and solicit their support. And never forget to bring your family along too. Talk with cousins, aunts, uncles, anyone in your family that might be interested in supporting you and helping you to push your issue forward. Another thing that works really well, and this is kind of a little case study, a lady in Alaska wanted to go into her village and talk a little bit about changing the norm because there were so many youth that were drinking that were underage, and it was going on publicly in the streets, and people knew that it was happening. And she wanted to change that. And so she started at this no awareness level, and she went to fish camp where everybody was working, and she just sat in fish camp, and as she worked, she talked about her concern about the village, her concern about sobriety, and her concern about the youth. And that one thing that she did started kind of a groundswell in that village because other parents were there, and they started to become more aware, and they were concerned too, but they really hadn't any idea at that point what to do. But by working with her and getting this group together, they made all kinds of changes in their community. At Denial and Resistance, at this point you can begin to network and collaborate with other people who provide services for youth such as mental health, domestic violence, law enforcement, medical. Really think outside the box too. You can collect media articles that describe local statistics, and at this point, people really don't want to know national statistics. They want to know what's going on right there in their home community. You can go to different related local community groups and start to present information. Just a 5-minute presentation, a very quick kind of presentation just to let people know you're there and that this is something that you have a passion about. You can prepare and submit short bullets or blurbs on the issue for your newspaper, tribal newspaper, church bulletins. Never overlook the power of those church bulletins. Local newspapers, and remember that you can still do media at this point, but it has to be low-intensity media, and it has to be something that people notice. It has to be visible. And Courtney, we lost the slides here. I can continue to talk about that, but we have no slides on our screen. And so basically, you can do things like whenever we started to do media research quite a few years ago, we found that at the lower intensity levels of media, if you do a really pretty design on the poster, people don't seem to notice that. They will look at the poster and they'll think, wow, that's just really beautiful. Wonder who the artist was that did that. But they may not read your message. If you instead put a person that lives there or some landmark that is of local interest, people will wonder what that is and what people are talking about. So they'll look at that and they say, that's someone I know. That's so-and-so on that poster. Wonder what he's talking about. And they will read the message. You can also put things in restaurants, school trays, the tray covers. There's all kinds of creative ways that you can find to deliver your media without having to spend a lot of money on billboards or things like that. At pre-planning, you can start to establish a work group of some sort. You can share local data, and again, remember it has to be local. And you can share information that you've gathered with the key people that might help you. You can use media for newspaper articles, and at this point, people are more interested in reading editorials or some kind of short article that uses local statistics. They may not be interested in statistics or an actual news article at that point.
Let's wait.
Okay, I'm going to put this on hold here since we don't have slides.
So Mark, the next slide says ready to put the pieces together. And then you can just move to the next slide, start with brainstorming.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay.
Start with brainstorming.
Great, and then we'll just say next every time, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So now we're ready to put the pieces together, and I'm hoping that you all have slides. We don't have slides in front of us, but hopefully you do. And brainstorming is the way that we start the workshop. Everybody now has the strategies, the things that work at each stage, those things that I just went over, and they have all the materials. And what we ask them to do is to do a brainstorming session with us. And this lasts about 7 minutes total. But it's amazing the information that you can get in that 7 minutes. And what we do is we work with a specific time limit. And it's very difficult for me personally to ask an elder to be quiet if they're talking too much. And this particular exercise needs people to talk quickly without discussion and just bringing up a very, very quick word in response to my questions. So what I do is I get a flip chart and we set the flip chart up, and then I give a message to people, kind of a cue, and I hold up 2 fingers. And I say, if we start to discuss things too much, I'm going to hold up 2 fingers, then that means hold that thought, and we will come back to it and we will have discussion, but now isn't the time. And that keeps me from having to say anything to someone directly, but it is a little cue that helps people to know that, oh, I'm talking too much, and hopefully they take that cue. And then we start out with, next slide. Then I ask people, what strengths do you have in this community? And I want you to just shout them out. Let me back up a second. It's kind of difficult without the slide, so let me back up a second here. What we do first is we ask people what their comfort foods are. And that gives them kind of a chance to play through what brainstorming is. And I just say, shout out to me what your comfort foods are, and we're only going to do this for 60 seconds. And people start to yell out popcorn, chocolate, chicken noodle soup, and they call out anything that makes them feel good when they eat it. And then they get the general idea that it has to be quick and it can only be 1 or 2 words. So then we start with strengths. And I ask them to very quickly identify what they see as strengths in their community. And those strengths don't have to be something like they would be used to naming, but to think outside the box again. What kind of strengths are in this community? Language, culture, history, anything that they can name that's a little bit outside of the box, that's wonderful. And you let that go for about 2 minutes. And usually people will fill up 1 to 2 sheets of all of the strengths that they can think of in the community. And then we do the same thing with concerns. What are your concerns? What kinds of things are you considering will be... Sorry about that. And so Then you ask them what their concerns are about the community and about implementing prevention in the community. At that point, they start to yell out some other things, and you write all of those things down on the flip chart and make a long list. And then you do the same thing with resources. And strengths are a little bit different from resources because resources are things that are maybe intangible. They might be the lakes. They might be the mountains. They might be hiking trails, but things that you could use as you're building your action plan. And then next slide, please. I stopped the brainstorming at about 6 minutes, and what I hope that you're seeing on your screen is an example form of how we type up the strengths, the concerns, and the resources. And we put all of those up around the room so that people can look at them, and we tell them that as they take breaks, they can always go up and scribble other things on there that they want to add that they might have thought of later. But we put those up there because then they start to do their action planning. Next slide, please. We then lead that brief discussion where we promise people that they could go back and talk if they had other things to talk about. So we ask them to finish any thoughts that they might have had that they didn't get to express during brainstorming. We then write the 6 dimensions on a flip chart, and we have the participants bring out those stage definition sheets from their folder, and we ask them, what stage do you think your community scored in community efforts? And they discuss it and they talk about it, and most of the time they'll start out a little high and say, well, I think we probably scored a 9. And then someone in the group usually says, no, I think we scored a 4. And then they'll talk about it a little bit, and they finally agree on a score, and we write that in. We then do that for the next dimension, and so on. And usually they're pretty right on target with guessing what their dimension scores were. And the reason we do this is because if we just bring those scores out and pass them out to people, probably someone will take issue with it, and then it goes into a discussion of, well, I don't think this interviewing was right, or I don't think this was right. But when you do it this way after the brainstorming, people will say, oh, yes, that makes sense. Of course it does. So usually they get to discuss it and decide what it is. Next slide. Once they've had time to really discuss that, then we present the readiness scores. And if there is further discussion at that point, we do allow that to happen because we want them to be able to get everything out that they talked about. And it's always a very good conversation. Now, prior to that, we also pulled out, next slide, sorry. Prior to that, we also had pulled out themes that came out of the community readiness interviews. And we also give the people that information at that point. So they are armed with not only their community readiness scores, but they are armed with the strengths and the resources in their community, and they're armed with the concerns in their community, and they have some of the major themes that came out of the interviews. So they're really very well informed to make an action plan. So once we put that, next slide please, that example of the community readiness diagnostic, then they know exactly what to do. They have their stage planning so they can pull out that information. They know their scores. They can put all of it together, and that's when we see things start to come together. People know what they're doing. They're very well informed, and they're ready to act. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Pam. And now, so the action planning really begins now. So the group has really been given kind of that grounding in what the community readiness model is. They've talked about their strengths and their concerns and resources, and they've been given their scores and themes and been able to talk about those scores. So now is the time where really as the facilitator, and if you all are the facilitator, really now the work then becomes the group is working either as one large group, and we'll talk about that, either as one large group or dividing the participants into smaller groups. So that's really left up to the group. If, we've done this with participants of 100 people in the room. We've had 4 people to 8 people in the room. So, the larger the group, you may want to ask them if they want to break into groups. Sometimes they just want to work as a large group. We give them two times. We just make sure that they're in the right group and how they want to do that. So they can break into groups. Usually they do. So it may be that you've got 4 groups of 8 people in a room, and they're going to, though, select 2 of the dimensions at least that they want to work on during this workshop. So for most of our communities that we've worked with, they usually pick the 2 lowest dimensions, but that doesn't have to be that way. People just have decided that that's usually the norm. So for this community, when you think of the slide that Pam just showed on the diagnostic, if a community scores 2 of them within vague awareness, which is knowledge of the issue and leadership at vague awareness, they may select those 2. And then each of those 4 groups, though, is going to work on those 2 dimensions. So you're going to have 4 sets of action plans for each group, for each dimension. But it may be, and this comes up in a lot of the communities we work with, when they break into groups, sometimes law enforcement will be their own group. That's just how they decide they want to do it. And they just want to work on knowledge of the issue. So that's fine. If they're going to do some promoting and awareness and develop some educational material as law enforcement, that's fine. The groups don't have to work on both if they decide that. The one thing, some of our communities actually have done 3 dimensions at a workshop, and that's fine. We just really suggest 2, just because of time constraints, but also you don't want to overload your participants in what they have to do following the workshop, because a lot of the people that are in attendance are going to be the people carrying out this plan. So before they actually start writing anything, as Pam had said, in the folder are going to be the strategies. And I know you saw some of those strategies listed under each dimension. So they pull out that whole sheet. They're going to have strategies for stage 1 all the way through stage 9. And so if you score at 2, we know that at denial, you can do strategies from denial or from stage 1, which is no awareness. So the group can look at strategies from 1 and 2 that they can incorporate into their strategies. And it doesn't have to look exactly. So, a one-on-one meeting, what does that look like in your community? Who is that needs to be contacted? And how does that look, whether culturally or organizationally, who needs to make those kinds of contacts? But each group then has their list of these are the kinds of things that you should be doing. So if you score a 2 on knowledge of the issue, this probably isn't the right time to do a strategy where we're going to hold a large community event. Because at 2, what that tells Pam and I is that you can put all the work into planning and getting the space for it, but probably who's going to show up are yourself, your staff, and maybe a few family and friends. But the community overall is not going to be coming to a community event on the issue because they're at denial right now. So you have to do those kind of one-on-one, and that's really when you look at those lists, the things are appropriate for the level of readiness. So next slide, to continue the action planning. What we do, as Pam has said, all of the resources and concerns are placed on flip charts all around the room because we want to make sure that the participants also use the list that have been, I think we got our, okay, we have our slides back on screen, so that's even better. But we want the participants to be able to use the resources, concerns, and strengths that they identified as a group, so we make sure that those are visible. What's really been nice in the last 5 years or so is that people now have phones that have cameras, and so they can take pictures of everything around the room and have them right and have the list right at their table so that they don't have to walk around to read them, so that they're available. And then one more time before people start the actual action planning, we just make sure that people feel comfortable in their group, that they don't need to move or break into smaller groups. We just want to make sure, because sometimes people, they'll get in the process and then they'll say, you know, I really rather be over in this group because I think there's more people from mental health over here and that's where I should be. So we just double check with people that they're in the right group if they've broken out into smaller groups. And then next slide. So again, always reminding people they can use strategies from lower stages of readiness. So if, for example, a community scores for leadership 3.75, which is vague awareness, they don't want to round up, so it's not a 4. So they don't want to use strategies from 4. They want to use the strategy examples from 1, 2, and 3, so to keep that consistent. And then, you know, this is probably one of the, you know, getting somebody to be kind of the designated leader of that table to write everything down is really important. And if you can emphasize to them that you as the facilitator need to take back with you these action plans, if they can write as legible as possible so that when you have to transcribe these into the typed document that you can actually read what's on the paper. And they will use that template that, you know, each folder has an action plan template. They're going to be writing on that template as the group discusses. Really, they're SMART objectives. So if it's leadership, you know, they want to identify what are we going to do with leadership, and that what is really the strategy that we have on those strategy sheets. These are the kinds of things. So if what is, you know, we're going to be doing one-on-one visits to tribal council. We're going to be doing one-on-one visits with mental health or behavioral health staff. So that's the what, and who's going to do that? You really have to identify, and it's usually people in the group that is participating in this workshop, but not always. But it's helpful to have people that are there be part of this plan so that, you know, Tom is going to be visiting the tribal council, and then what are they going to be providing to the tribal council? So information about this workshop and the mission of this workshop. That may be the very first step, and some local data. So what are you going to do? Who's going to do it? Where are they going to tribal council? And then by when? You know, within the next 2 months, month, you know, that's up to the group to decide so that we can then say it's been done. You know, yes, they got on a tribal agenda and they were able to present the action plan and the mission of this group, and with that came then increase of leadership's knowledge and support of this whole endeavor and action that the group is taking. Next slide. One of the things that, so once everyone is done, and usually each group has about 4 to 5 pages of action plan. And we usually ask that the whole group come up, and I know, you know, everybody does this different. You've all been involved in these kinds of activities. But we like the whole group to go up and present at least one aspect of the plan, because it really was a group kind of initiation and a group process. If there's someone that really doesn't want to, we don't force people to do that. But it really kind of increases that teamwork and gives everybody kind of the, you know, the, I can't think of the word. Yeah, the cohesiveness, thank you, Pam, as part of the group. And then what Pam and I will do, so all the groups have presented, and you get there may be duplication. There may be groups that came up with actually kind of the same process, but many of them are going to be different, even though they've used the same strategy sheets. So what Pam and I are going to do when we're done with this is we have to take all of those plans and merge it into one. And it's very easy to do. And so it becomes really a wonderful document for the group to have. But what Pam and I want to make sure before this group leaves the room is that if there aren't any goals or strategies related to collaboration and communication amongst the group of people that are at the workshop, we want to make sure that that's added as one of the strategies. So how is this group going to continue its momentum? You know, when could you meet again? Who may be taking the lead to send out an invite? Just so that we know that, you know, within a month or a month and a half at the most, that this group can reconvene as a group to go over the action plan. And at that time, Pam and I are going to be on the call doing a conference call in with this group to go over that action plan with them to make sure that we got it right. And really sometimes even at that 1 month interval, some of the steps have already been taken. But we want to make sure that that collaboration starts immediately and that they have a plan to meet again and discuss things. Pam, it depends on, you know, if you're close enough. What we do is we photograph all of the action plans, and then people can keep them, and then we're not traveling back and forth with paper. That's up to you. If you're local, you can just collect the actual instruments themselves.
With the iPhone.
Oh, with our iPhone. And then the important part for us is once we're done with that workshop, and we let people know, and we have their emails because we have people sign in, that within 1 week of that workshop, we make sure that everyone there gets a copy and that action plan, the completed one that's been merged, is sent out to everyone so that they have it. So that when that 1 month follow-up is done, we know that everybody's been sent that action plan and that we can go forward and review that at that time. Next slide. So for us, and I just kind of want to follow, this is just an example of an action plan, and this community scored at a 2.8, which is denial for knowledge of the issue. And their overall strategy was to meet with individuals and groups currently addressing this issue or issues that relate to youth violence. So that's kind of their overall strategy that they want to do. And so these are the steps. And we, you know, as with all action plans, you know, the more concrete you can get and specific, the better, because then you know what's happening and what you want to do. So for this group, what they wanted to do was develop a list of people and organizations in the community who work with youth and families, and members of the group will meet with them to discuss prevention efforts. So that's A, and then on the who's responsible and by when, at the next meeting, each member will bring a list of potential people and organizations with which to meet, and one list will be compiled, and it will be determined which group members will meet with them by November of 2016. So we know that they want to reach out to organizations and people working with youth, and that they're going to start that reach out by November of 2016 and meet with people. They're going to develop a brief talking point paper and mission and goals of the group. And I think that's really important, especially in our smaller communities where there's lots of things that need to happen in communities. And if you have talking points or bullet points that you can give everybody that's involved to say, this is our purpose, this is our mission, this is what we want to do, then everybody is on the same page and relaying the same information throughout the community about your organization or about the mission and about the program that you're doing. And again, you know, that we have 2 individuals that will write up those talking points by November of 2016. And the reason it's by then is because they need to start going out and meeting with people in November of 2016. And then the last step for this one is that each member will meet with 3 people or organizations to discuss the issue, gain their support and investment in raising awareness in the community. So of the people that were at the workshop and that continue in the process, each one of those people will meet with 3 organizations in the community. So this is a little bit larger community, I want to say that. So there were enough organizations that it was a group of about 20 people, and there were enough for each of them to actually meet with 3 organizations that either dealt with youth, families, or related issues. And so that's, you know, very clear what they want to do and by when they want to do that we can go back then at a 1 month, 2 months, and really look at that to say, what's the progress? How is it going? Any concerns? Any other things that we need to add to this work plan that wasn't there that you've come into? And this is, again, for knowledge of the issue at 2.8 at denial. they wanted to begin an internet search for resources. And I'm not going to read this whole, but as you can see again, it's those steps. They're going to search, and these are acronyms, Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency, Substance Abuse Mental Health, and Indian Health Service websites. Lots of free information on all three of those, and that they were going to gather what they could that would be free. And that Mark in this community said that he would do that search by May 2016. Then they're going to present that information, develop some bullet points back to the group overall, so that then they have bullets, blurbs that they can put in either local newspaper, tribal newspaper, church bulletins, wherever that group feels that the information should be placed. So again, just another example of a work plan that comes out. And all of these steps are part of, when you look at the strategies that you should be used at level 1, 2, and 3, these are the types of things that should be happening. So, you can tell they're kind of low intensity. So, you're not doing major events, you're not putting up billboards, you're not holding a class on youth delinquency. It's really working within the community to get their level of awareness up so that you can do those next steps, which is having community events where people will actually show up because they know it's an issue and they want to be involved in this solution. So this is one just on leadership. And this can be, for many of our communities, kind of a touchy issue with leadership, especially if they're in the room, when they score low. But again, when people are grounded in this, and especially when leadership understands the model, these are people's perceptions. And sometimes it's really an issue of the leaders haven't informed the community of how involved they are in issues. So they may score low because the community's responses are, they don't care, they're not involved, I don't know what they do. The issue is really that leadership needs to do a better job at letting the community and their constituents know what they do, how they're involved, and how they support things. And so we've helped lots of tribal leaders and city leaders in developing a plan on how do we disseminate information that people will read that know that we're actually doing work that's good for the community and that really addresses this issue. So part of this plan, though, because the community, because it scored at a vague awareness, was they wanted to meet with tribal council. And really this is the example I had given you earlier. And this has worked out well in most of our communities, whether with tribal council or city council, in really going to them to tell them the issue, to tell them your passion, having those talking points, letting them know that an action plan has been developed, because it really motivates them too to say, we do have a group that's actually cohesive and collaborating, and we need to get on board with that and asking for their involvement. So an example of an action plan with leaders. What we do as far as follow-up with our groups, and I think this is important for, I think for all of us in any work that we're doing, is that sometimes when we do action plans, I've lived in communities where I've been part of a group that, we're going to do this and we're going to do that, and then you go back to the next meeting and we're still talking about we're gonna, and 3 months later we're still talking about we're gonna, but nobody's doing anything about the action plan. So with follow-up, though, on the plan, it really creates, we need to move because we said we were going to do this by. So for the National Center for Community Readiness, the nice part of what we've been able to do is to follow up with that plan at 1 month, at 3 months, at 6 months, and a year, to go over all of those strategies and to say, where are you with this? Do you need help? How can we assist you? Do we need to tweak anything? And then once those are met, to be able to cross those off and to say, okay, we've met that objective, that strategy, now let's move and add another one onto that. And then in the process at 1 year, redoing community readiness interviews to see how have our scores changed over the year of us addressing knowledge of the issue or leadership. So it's kind of a moving document that changes but also stays in people's awareness, because we're all, I know everyone on this line is not just working on the issue that you're funded to right now. It's because with youth issues come not just violence, but teen pregnancy and nutrition and health and mental health and housing and school. So your spectrum of the issues that your kids need is wider than this grant may cover. So having just one action plan that may deal specifically with just youth violence or bullying or suicide, sometimes we let those kind of be put on the shelf because we're so busy sometimes just addressing kind of the fires that happen in our communities. So with that kind of follow-up, it kind of keeps that action plan in motion so that things are continually happening, and that you can add those, if a fire comes up, that crisis, that maybe that needs to be added to the action plan. That what right now our kids are dealing with, and I think we need to incorporate that issue into this action plan. There's nothing says that you can't do that. As a matter of fact, that's what you should be doing, because that's where your community is ready to start addressing that issue. So we go through that objective, and if you can do that as the facilitator of this action plan, that would be great to moderate and kind of check in with that group on how things are going. Again, we'd like to have, not everyone that attends that first workshop is always present at all of the follow-up calls or conference calls, or if you can actually do it on site. But you usually have a very good core of people that remain within that group. And we have some communities and tribes that we've worked with that it's the same people over 4 or 5 years that still, that action plan has been updated, revised, and continued. So it's been a great process for us, and to continue that follow-up, and to also remember, through that follow-up, other issues come up that you might want to use the model for in itself. So it may be if suicide becomes an issue and it's not the focus of the current action plan, that maybe you do interviews on using community readiness on the issue of suicide, whether that's with adults or youth, and then develop an action plan specific to that. So, the things are endless. This is one nice thing, because I think people like visuals. I know I do, and our communities appreciate it. So when things are done, what we send back to the community after all of our follow-up contacts is everything underlined means that it's been done. And so we can send this back to the community to say, here are the things that you've done, and we've progressed. We've done all of these things, and now the new action steps are part of the second page of this action plan. So it gives people the sense of, wow, we really did get a lot done within the first 3 months, 6 months of this action plan. We accomplished the things that we said we would by February of 2016. So I want to go back before we finish this, and I haven't really looked at questions. I'm sorry, we've been talking, and so I want to just double check for any questions at this time.
We want to end this section with the great law of the Six Nations Iroquois Confederacy, which is kind of standard for us. But in our every deliberation, we must consider the impact of our decisions on the next 7 generations. And these action plans do that. They help people to look forward and to think about how to make their community better for their children, their grandchildren, and their grandchildren who will become grandparents and mothers and fathers. I do want to thank everybody for kind of hanging in there with us through the technical difficulties. It was a little bit discombobulating to lose our slide presentation in the middle, but fortunately Barb always thinks of those kinds of things and had our presentation printed out, so we were able to continue. But thank you for doing that, and for putting up with Siri, who apparently, even though I muted my phone, wanted to get in on the presentation. So we're going to pass this over to...
Yeah, and so we left the, I know there was going to be 10 minutes for our guest speaker, and so Courtney, I will turn this over to you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, I successfully unmuted without hanging up. So So hello, everyone. First of all, thank you, Dr. Thurman and Dr. Plested, for presenting to us today, and once again, and walking us through very practical steps to utilizing the scores from the community readiness in strategic planning. That is the next steps for, I think, where a lot of our grantees are and the hopes of where we want to be. So we do appreciate the guidance there. And we look forward to continuing those conversations and the work in the communities. So, but at this time, we're very excited to have Ms. Melinda Sprague with us to share a little bit about her experiences. And Ms. Sprague comes to us from the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. So Melinda is going to have to correct my language, my pronunciation there. So, but we wanted to invite Melinda on today, and they have some experience. They are a grantee, a 2015 grantee. They have both the tribal youth programs and healing to wellness programs, and they have conducted both community readiness assessment for both programs, and they have a lot of experience to share, and so we're really excited to have Melinda. Melinda, are you on?
Hi, Courtney. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right, I successfully unmuted. Hello, everyone. My name is Melinda Sprague, and I'm the Planning Assistant Grant Specialist for the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lumpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. I'd like to thank Courtney, Anna, and Natalie for inviting us to speak today, and Pam and Barb for the great presentation. I see some of our friends participating. A little shout out to Samantha and Sabrina from Kaw Nation of Oklahoma, and Diane Whitson, our travel court clerk. And we're excited to share our experiences today. As Courtney said, we have both the Purpose Area 9 and the Purpose Area 8 grant.
Melinda, if you could maybe mute the little speaker icon at the top of your screen, that'll eliminate the feedback that we're getting.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes, that's perfect.
Oh. So I'll start over. My name is Melinda Sprague. I'm from the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lumpqua, and Siuslaw Indians. I'm the Planning Assistant Grant Specialist, and as Courtney said, we have both a Purpose Area 8 and a Purpose Area 9 grant, and so we've conducted 2 community readiness assessments. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit today. So Courtney, if you would just want to go ahead and we can start.
Sure. And so in preparing for this discussion here, we thought it'd be best just to ask some questions, and Melinda could respond. And so our first question is, many grantees have expressed some anxiety about the community readiness process, and yet some are more familiar with it. How are you and your team able to dive into the community readiness process and tackle this task despite maybe it being a new process for you?
So prior to receiving these grants, we had never conducted a community readiness assessment. So we attended the Purpose Area 9 OJJDP new grantee training in Reno and learned about the community readiness process. Our team was both excited and apprehensive to tackle this task and complete the process. There's many pieces to this process, including questioning your community regarding attitudes of leadership, which can be a little bit uncomfortable, but we found that most were okay with giving feedback in an anonymous format. Being that this was a new process, we held a meeting as soon as we got back from our OJJDP training in Reno to debrief and discuss the Purpose Area 9 process, the community readiness process, and what was expected in the strategic planning toolkit. Our team debriefed about the training and explained the community readiness process using the presentation given at the training. After our presentation, we went through the community readiness template and identified many of the individuals in each category listed. It lists categories such as elders, community at large, law enforcement, and discussed who would be responsible for conducting which interviews. we divided the interviews among 3 interviewers with a goal of getting a minimum of 10 interviews from the individuals identified. For our community readiness assessment, we came to a consensus that our topic should be youth engagement for tribal youth programs because that's an issue that we've struggled with in our youth programs in the past. Like I said before, we have both a Purpose Area 8 and a Purpose Area 9 grant. So the Purpose Area 8 grant, the Healing to Wellness, the issue identified for that community readiness assessment was drug and alcohol use among Native youth in our community.
Interesting. Great. Well, thank you.
So yeah, we just really wanted to get our steering committee, all of our planning department, all of our Healing of the Canoe program staff, our tribal administrator, all of our directors kind of on board with what we were doing. And I think that was kind of the first process was, you know, bringing back the community readiness and kind of explaining it to them as a brand new process. No one in our community was familiar with this process prior to us conducting our community readiness assessment. So kind of just starting from the basics and going over the template that you provided from the OJJDP training, and then also the manual and the interview template, and just kind of starting piece by piece with identifying who we were going to be interviewing and how we wanted that process to happen and how we were going to address our community and explaining the process. And we just went from there, and that was kind of how we started.
Great. Thank you. That's a good transition to my next question. So you mentioned the manual was helpful. So, you know, how was the manual helpful? And I was also wondering if there was any portions of the manual that may have been challenging.
Yeah, so I thought the manual was great. It really laid out the process in a step-by-step format that's very easy to follow. So we went through the manual and we printed off a copy for each of the members that were kind of involved in this process. And then we also printed off the interview templates and kind of went through that. As we went through the interviewing and then more specifically the scoring process, there was a couple of things that we identified that maybe we were unsure about or we thought maybe could have been a little bit different. Specifically on the interview template, A is listed as prevention programming, but there's no questions associated with that letter. That caused confusion because the anchored rating scale starts with dimension A, existing community efforts. In order to alleviate confusion, we had to go back and change our interview templates to match the lettering and dimensions listed in the anchored rating scale. Another issue was that on the anchored rating scale under dimension A, score 7 states efforts, programs, activities have been running for 4 years. Given that 4 years was the qualifier, all of our scores in Dimension A were 7 or above based on the longevity of these programs instead of the effectiveness of those programs. So based on most of those, those scores in Dimension A came out at about 7.3, but when we were reading through the interview specifically, had the 4 years not been a qualifier, we think it would have ranked between a 3 and a 4. So we felt that that kind of skewed our data in a way. And we also felt that some of the questions within the interview template could have been more specific to the issue. For example, under Dimension D, it states, describe your tribe or community. It's great to have general information and open-ended questions, but we found that it was not as useful within the scoring and the rating scale, and you know, we're really using this as a way to kind of gauge how ready our community is to engage our youth in tribal youth programs.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. Maybe we can come back to that point that you had made earlier about the effectiveness, the question referring to the number of programs or the number of years as being a qualifier as opposed to the effectiveness. And so we could maybe bring Pam and Barb back in on that if they have any comments about that.
Do you want us to do that now?
Sure. Let's go ahead and do that now.
So just real briefly, I mean, it's a really good point because the model doesn't, the scores are not related to effectiveness. So that would come about, so like at the workshop, what we hear is, we do have a lot of programs, and that's really what we want to know is what efforts are available. And then at the workshop, what we hear, or even in the interviews, nobody uses those services. They breach confidentiality. They're not trained. The list is endless sometimes on the negative about not always. Sometimes they say they're great programs, but when they talk about either way, they're great programs or maybe inept programs running in our community. That's not the role of this model. Is not to score or rate the effectiveness, the success of programs. That comes from the workshop when people say, but they're not really doing what we need them to do in the community. Well, then that becomes part of the action plan. How do we address that this program really isn't addressing the needs, or people won't even access their services? So I don't know if that makes it clear. This isn't an evaluation tool to evaluate effectiveness. It's just, and the 4 years are set. It used to actually be 5 years, and we had to lower it because grants now usually are 3 years on service grants. They used to be, remember the days, they used to be 5 years. So it did get lowered to 4 because now anything more than 4 means it's probably not just grant-driven. It might be multiple grant-driven, but at least it's not a one-time 3-year grant program that's in the community. So I hope that answers your question. The effectiveness comes out during the action planning and people meeting about the scores.
Yeah, that makes sense. I noticed that in that category, our overall score was 7.3, and that ranked with stabilization. So I would say that as far as longevity of those programs, stabilization is shown in the continuity of that. But it was just interesting to me reading through those because of like what you said about what people had to say about those programs and things, which we have not begun our action plans yet. We're working on kind of framing those. So I'm sure that will come out, but that was just one thing that kind of our scorers had identified as, based on what people are saying, maybe that qualifying 4 years, had that not been there, our data would have been different.
Yeah, and the one thing that you might want to do, and that's why the themes of pulling out the themes from the interviews is really helpful. So for example, you score a 7.2 on efforts, but if it is kind of that, and I hate to say negative, but the comments of they're really not fulfilling what they should in the community, they're not culturally appropriate, no one accesses their, so yeah, we have all these, we've heard that, we have a lot of programs, but nobody uses them because they don't trust them. That's a theme when we hear that, when we're doing 12 interviews and 10 people say that, that's going to be one of the primary themes of the interview is that, yes, we have programming, but no one is accessing them. And that becomes really helpful when you're doing that, the group process at the workshop on how do we address this issue. We have services, but nobody's actually using them.
Right, and I would say that some of our services, I would say we have identified as, could be better or it could be changed in a way that would be more effective and things like that. So I'm excited to see how that will play out in the action planning process.
Great. Well, thank you. This has been a very fruitful conversation. And, I think I had some other questions, but so we're going to go ahead and move on. But this has been a very good discussion about that, and I think probably timely as well as you guys are moving into your action plans. So regarding the community readiness assessment, Melinda, is there anything that surprised you that you learned from conducting the community readiness?
There were some smaller kind of things smaller and larger things that came out of the process. Like one thing that I kind of already touched on was just kind of evaluating the effectiveness of some of our programs, the community perspective on the effectiveness of some of those programs. Specifically related to youth engagement and how those programs engage youth. That was some really helpful information. There was also some smaller kind of pieces of information that came out. For instance, the majority of our events we advertise in our monthly newsletter. We used to do a lot of direct mailers to advertise events, but we kind of switched more into just putting a lot of that in the newsletter and on the website. And when we did our community readiness assessment, one of the things that people identified was that they really enjoyed getting direct mailers as kind of a reminder and something to maybe pin up somewhere, or just to have as like a physical hard copy of an event notification. So that was something that was really helpful. You know, when you're talking about youth engagement and youth participation, reaching parents and reaching families, maybe we could do more direct mail service, and that would be something that would kind of help with the participation transition. And another kind of interesting thing that came out of the process was when we identified who we were going to interview, some of the people that we chose to interview were from the community at large, as far as outside of our tribal community, but interconnected to youth programs or youth engagement related kind of criteria. And so when those interviews came back, it was interesting to see what the community at large, what their perspective was on not only our tribal programs, but other youth programs that are available in our communities that we could be utilizing as resources. And there were many things identified that our staff were unaware of as far as, you know, community resources. And, you know, as a tribal nation, there's always a limited amount of resources, so tapping into outside community resources and creating those partnerships is always extremely beneficial, I think, for all parties. And so it was nice to kind of see, A, their perspective, and B, kind of what they had to offer, and, you know, reaching out to them and saying, you know, we're starting this tribal youth program for Healing of the Canoe. This is what the basis is, and we'd like to interview you and see what your thoughts and perspectives are, not only on our community, but youth engagement in our community at large, and what could be done and what.
Uh-oh. Melinda, are you still there? Oh, it looks like we may have lost Melinda. Wow, we're having all kinds of technical issues today. So,
Please stand by for a few minutes. We're having a few phone issues there. Melinda may be getting back on here shortly. Courtney, could you go ahead and introduce yourself while we're waiting on Melinda to come back on?
could you say that again, Mark? I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Sure. Could you go ahead and introduce yourself while we're waiting on Melinda to come back on?
Oh, certainly, certainly. My name is Courtney Arholer. I am the program manager here at the OJJDP Tribal Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center, and we are located here at the Indian Country Child Trauma Center at the University of Oklahoma Health and Sciences Center. And if I could add another organization on there, I wouldn't do it. So I want to thank all of you for joining us today in this call, and many of you that have joined us for the previous calls as well. We also have some, the rest, this is the third webinar in a series of 9 webinars, and it's all around strategic planning. And so we felt it vital to begin any strategic planning with community engagement. And that is in this model that we've selected and invited Pam and Barb to come present on the community readiness assessment, or the community readiness model. We feel it does such a great job in engaging the community early on in the development, that when we begin to think about sustainability of any effort is already built in, because we've engaged the community. And when you engage, what we learn is when we engage the community in meaningful ways, anything that is developed from the community and from those that are involved in it, they're willing to sustain it. And we get leadership buy-in and a lot of different things. I've been hearing a lot of wonderful things about the community readiness, and from several grantees that we have on the line. So it's really exciting to hear all of the things that's being shared, and then Melinda coming on and sharing her experiences. I think she's on. She's trying to reconnect. I know that there were a couple of key things that she wanted to share, and so I wanted to try to give her the time to do that.
Hi, Courtney. Can you hear me?
Hello, Melinda. Yes.
I'm back.
Great. Glad you made it back. Sorry about what happened.
That's okay. Did you want me to kind of re-answer the question about is there anything that surprised you, or did you get my answer on that?
I think we kind of got the answer, and I think we kind of got the gist of it. And if you just kind of want to add another thought or so, and then we can add on and we move into our next question, our final question.
I just wanted to kind of reiterate that I think that this process allows for a lot of input from a lot of different areas, and I like that the format asks for individuals from kind of different sections of the community. I think that that's really helpful.
Great. So you kind of began this, anticipating my next question here, really kind of some takeaways. So what are your main takeaways that you would like to share to encourage other communities when they're conducting their community readiness?
Just a few things I have, just kind of to be mindful of who you are interviewing, just keeping in mind that all community members have their own biases and opinions toward the tribe and the tribal community, and just keeping in mind kind of a certain perspective that someone may have in interviewing them and selecting them, and I think that making sure you're selecting people from various categories is important, so you're not maybe getting, all people from the community at large or all elders or, because I think that that's really essential to the process of having the diversity in perspective and background as well. And then another thing that was kind of funny is when we were going through and scoring our interviews, we were having this group kind of conversation, and it's a little bit difficult sometimes to not have your own bias or perspective when you're reading and identifying these things. And so just to be mindful that you're scoring based off of the interviewee's answers and not your own perspective. And just that this should be an interdepartmental conversation, and the more people you can get involved in the process, the better. I think that our structure for our Tribal Youth Program is a little bit different than many others, being that our Tribal Youth Program is located in the planning department. So we have myself and the planning director, and then our Healing of the Canoe program staff members, but we've also involved in the project the education director, the health director, tribal administrator, tribal court, culture director, and so many different people that are involved in tribal youth programs across the board, and just kind of laying that foundation and inviting people to the conversation, I think, is the best way to really approach it.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Melinda. That's definitely some good takeaways, and again, driving home the importance of engaging our communities in meaningful ways is, that's what we're hearing. And so thank you for sharing, Melinda, your experiences. Thank you for bringing that wonderful energy to our conversation, and we wish you well in your planning. And you also remember that you have your TA coordinator there to work with one-on-one to provide additional technical assistance as you move into that strategic planning process or through the strategic planning process. And that's for all of the grantees that have joined us today. You all have your TA coordinators that are in communication with you. So please utilize them and utilize us as a TA center. Well, also, there's been a sign-up sheet, I believe, that's been going around for an additional, very targeted 20-minute consultation time with Pam and Barb. And I believe we set the dates for the 29th and 30th, I believe. I don't have those in front of me. So if you have not yet signed up for that, please communicate with your TA coordinator a time that would work for you, and prepare your time so you can maximize that 20 minutes with Pam and Barb. And but we thank you. Before we go, I'm looking at our questions box. I was wondering if anyone had any questions. I think we do have a few minutes to field a couple of questions. So are there any questions from anyone on the line? Please type your question in the chat box. There's a lot of thank yous going on, so that's great. Norma, I see your comment there. We'll definitely follow up with you immediately after this call, so thank you for that. So Anna has a question. If we could just clarify the first point of confusion that Melinda noted about the dimensions and having to redo their questionnaire, the questionnaire confusion. And so I think there were some,
Sure.
A little bit, but maybe we can say a little bit more.
Yeah, so in the manual and even on the template, A and B questions are combined. And if you look at the questions, there's some that relate to what efforts are available, how long, and then kind of how knowledgeable are people, what do they know. And the reason they're combined and not separated is because the flow of the questions, there's some B questions that are in the mix of, like there's an A question, and then just for the flow of the question, then there's a B question, and then there's an A question, and then there's a B question. I don't know if that makes sense, but it was the only two dimensions that we really couldn't separate them, A and B, but there are separate questions. So if you just look at the questions and you look at the anchored rating scale, you can see that probably, there's, I can't remember the total number of questions. I think there's 9 in there, but four or five relate to dimension A and 4 or 5 relate to dimension B. So there are two distinct, there are scores for A, there are scores for B, and I'm not sure which manual, because in the revised one, I believe we even put, I think we added the A and B after the question in there, and if we didn't, Courtney, let me know, and I can tell you which ones are A, which ones are B, and you can resend that out. So there is a Dimension A questions, there are Dimension B questions. It's just that we couldn't separate them because they didn't run, we couldn't flow them correctly through the process. So it was really just an issue of ease of asking the questions, so they were kind of back and forth, A, B, A, B, A, B.
Okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that would probably be helpful, and we can...
And Courtney, if you can send me the questions they actually used, then I can just highlight and identify A's and identify B. How's that?
Or we can do it in the individual TA sessions, too.
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody will have a complete copy.
Okay. So just help me clarify, because I was reading something
Sure.
when you were talking. We're asking Melinda to send the questions?
Well, is everyone using the same questions?
No, I think everyone is sort of customizing the questions.
Okay.
Utilizing templates. We've guided the grantees to utilize the templates.
Okay. So why don't I just use our standard template, and then they'll know which question is A, I mean, depending on the issue, but I'll just use our standard template and send that to you that has the A and the B after the questions under A and B.
Okay, that'll be great.
Then you can disseminate it, and they can just add it to their questions, whatever issue they decided to drop in.
Okay. I think that'll work. And then if there's, of course, any follow-up questions, they have their TA coordinator, and then also can be addressed on the targeted consultation session that they have with you.
Yeah, absolutely. We can cover that with anybody that wants to go through those questions on that call.
Okay, great. All right, well, I'm not seeing any more questions come through the chat box, so I'm going to turn it back over to Chelsea. At this time, I personally want to say thank you to all of our presenters and to everyone. But Chelsea, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Courtney, and thank you, Melinda. And a big thank you to Dr. Plested and Dr. Jumper Thurman for sharing their knowledge with us today. To wrap up today's presentation, we'd like you, the audience, to take a quick look at the documents available for download in the Files for Download box at the lower portion of your screen. In the Files for Download box, we have available to you a copy of the Community Readiness Manual, the Strategic Planning Toolkit timeline. This is the timeline that's going to outline important deadlines and community of practice sessions ahead. Also available is today's agenda and the PowerPoint presentation that was presented today. On the right-hand side of the Files for Download box is a web links box. We have Dr. Jumper Thurman and Dr. Plested's Colorado State University web link there to reach the National Center. We also have the Tribal Youth TTA Center YouTube web link where you can go back and check out previous videos, previous sessions, and other helpful information that might supplement your learning experience. We'd like to thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your time and hope you found the information in today's presentation helpful. Let us know if this information was helpful to you by completing our survey. That survey link is available now in the chat pod for everyone to navigate to. Please take a few minutes. It's always important to get your feedback and suggestions. So if you do just take a few minutes to complete the survey, that'll help us better serve you. If you have any questions or need more information, please reach out to us via the contact information on your screen.